You've testified you were never investigated, ever, for anything. Why'd you lie to this committee? Here's why.
Senator
is because
Hawley.
People are killed in these kind of incidents. It is an act of
Your
terrorism.
time is expired.
A special agent in charge found that you were involved. You lied to this committee in saying that you were never investigated.
Senator
you were never
Hawley.
the target of investigation. In fact, you were.
Your time
you lied to us
is
blatantly,
expired.
and you know it. Director Stone Manning, let me just start with this. When you came before this committee in 2021, this is before I was a member of the committee, you were asked as part of your confirmation whether you'd ever been investigated, arrested, charged by any federal, state, or local law enforcement authority for the violation of any federal, state, or local law, regulation, or ordinance other than a minor traffic offense. We asked that question of all people before the committee. You answered no. Do you stand by that testimony?
Senator, I do stand by that testimony and was proud to be confirmed to do this job.
What's tree spiking, Director?
Senator, again, this committee engaged quite a bit in.
No, that's a factual question. Do you know what it is?
And I do. It is.
Do you want to tell us? Go ahead.
Yeah, it's when people illegally put metal objects into trees so that they prevent a timber sale.
What happens if a chainsaw hits a spike?
Sometimes when a chainsaw hits a spike, it can buck the saw.
Yeah, violently recoil, potentially kill or seriously maim the loggers.
Yeah, which is why I notified the federal authorities that I had heard that happened.
Loggers like, for instance, George Alexander, this is from an article on the Washington Post explaining what happens when trees get spiked. Loggers who are blue-collar workers, by the way, these are not wealthy people. These are not people who have had the advantages perhaps you and others have had. People like George Alexander, who, for example, in May 1987, at age 23, his chainsaw hit a tree spike. I'm quoting, his face was slashed from eye to chin, his teeth were smashed, his jaw was cut in half. That's a typical reaction when a logger hits a spike. Now, you just said, I think just a second ago, that you were involved. There were 2 people convicted in 1989 of putting 500 pounds of spikes in an Idaho forest. Senator Rich mentioned this just a moment ago. You testified you sent a letter to the Forest Service on their behalf. I have it here. The letter says, among other things, this letter sent to notify you that the post office sale, that's the forest sale in Idaho, has been spiked heavily. The reason for this action is that this piece of land is very special to the earth. It is home to the elk, deer, mountain lions, birds, and especially the trees. It goes on, I would be more than willing to pay you $1 for the sale, but you'd have to find me first, and that could be your worst nightmare. P.S. You bastards go in there anyway, and a lot of people could get hurt. Why'd you send this?
Senator, as I said at the time, over 30 years ago, a really angry and turns out violent person handed me that letter and said, will you send this to the Forest Service?
And you did. Why?
What you just talked about in 1987 to a logger, this is 1988, 9. I understood that people could get hurt.
Why didn't you notify the federal authorities? Why did you send this threatening letter on behalf of these 2 men who were convicted of crimes?
I was terrified of them and wanted no involvement with them.
So you wanted no involvement, but you sent a letter that says you bastards go in there anyway and a lot of people could get hurt? Why didn't you just contact the FBI or anybody, any local authority?
Because the person who did this act threatened people's lives if they disclosed who did it.
Yeah, in fact, you were investigated for being involved, weren't you? Here we have a letter sent to this committee from the special agent of the USDA Forest Service, Michael Merkley, who was in charge of the investigation. He says, and he details this in the letter to this committee, that he investigated you for your involvement. He says, and I'm going to quote now, grand jury subpoenas were issued for hair samples, handwriting exemplars, fingerprints. These subpoenas were served on persons suspected of being involved, having knowledge of the incident, including Ms. Tracy Stone Manning. You've testified you were never investigated, ever, for anything. Why'd you lie to this committee?
Senator, this committee delved deeply, went into the court records where I testified against these men.
Were you issued subpoenas?
No.
You were not issued
Well,
subpoenas?
I was issued a subpoena to appear before a grand jury with
Really?
with
Because
about 30
here's what he
people.
says. Ms. Stone Manning was extremely difficult to work with. She was antagonistic. She was uncooperative, refused to provide her handwriting exemplars and fingerprints as ordered by the grand jury. It was not until after we informed her she would be arrested if she did not comply with the subpoenas that she provided the samples to me. So you were subpoenaed.
Senator Hawley,
You
your
were
time
the
is
target of an
expired.
investigation.
Do you have a question?
You were the target of an investigation. You lied to this committee. Why?
Senator, I never received a target letter. I'm curious, I understand why this committee jumped over 30 years of my career in considering my nomination and went to a salacious moment from graduate school where I tried to protect people. What I don't understand is why we're not looking at the last 3.5 years now.
Here's why.
Senator
It's because people are killed in these kind of incidents. It is an act of
Your
terrorism.
time is expired.
A special agent in charge found that you were involved. You lied to this committee in saying that you were never investigated. You
Senator
were never
Hawley.
the target of investigation. In fact, you were.
Your time
You lied to us
is
blatantly.
expired.
And you know it.
Thank you. Senator Brasso.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Stoneman, the Bureau's Rock Springs Resource Management Plan will devastate the people of Southwest Wyoming, lock up millions of acres of land, local communities. The entire state relies on those lands. The governor, state legislature, county commissioners, local communities all strongly oppose this plan. So why are you ignoring Wyoming's opposition to the plan across the board?
Senator, thanks for the question. As you know, the Rock Springs plan there's a draft out. There was a public comment period. There was a lot of hyperbole about facts that were not true about the plan. So we've done a lot of education work with your constituents about what's in the plan. More importantly, we extended the public comment period and worked with the governor. He stood up a task force, and those folks got to walk in the shoes of our BLM field staff in Rock Springs to give us recommendations for the final. We're digging in, looking at those recommendations, and I am certain that Wyomingites will see their voices reflected in the final.
Well, I just hope the BLM does not dig in, but actually reverses course on this issue. Last month, the Bureau took steps to prohibit coal leasing in the Powder River Basin. The Bureau claims that coal production in the region won't be impacted until the year 2038, so 14 years from now. The Bureau claims that existing leases are sufficient to meet expected demand for coal. My question then is, why is the Bureau taking this action now if you don't say it's going to have any impact for at least 14 years?
Senator, thanks for the question. As you know, the President has asked us to turn and transition to a clean energy economy. The lands in the Powder River Basin are leased through 2041. And so you see the draft or the final before you. The record of decision is still in formulation.
Well, I'd point out that the front page story in the New York Times not too long ago pointed out that this president's pipe dream is not actually something that can be possibly done in our country and our needs for energy, as the committee hearings have shown again and again and again. I think this plan is completely reckless. Last year, the Powder River Basin supplied 45% of all the coal mined in the United States, and if this carbon-free grid doesn't materialize, and I don't believe it will, what do? You suggest that we start importing coal from China and other places?
Senator, I have great faith in the ingenuity of the American people. We are hard at work every day. We have permitted 7.9 gigawatts in just 3.5 years. I believe we can reach the transition the President has asked us to reach.
Well, I agree that the ingenuity of the American people, it's really hard when your agency continues to block efforts to produce the critical minerals that we need and so much of the product that we need for the American economy. So in April, your Bureau issued a rule that will dramatically raise bonding requirements on oil and gas producers. This is money that producers must pay up front in order to operate on federal lands. According to the data from your own department, there were only 37 abandoned wells on lands managed by the Bureau. It's less than 0.1% of all the wells that the Bureau manages. So how do you justify your decision to increase bonding requirements by as much as 25-fold?
Senator, both the Government Accountability Office and the Inspector General have written reports that suggest, I think rightly so, that our bonding rates, which are over 60 years old, are not high enough. We have thousands of idled wells on our public lands, and idled wells are the last stop before they become orphaned. Not all of them become orphaned, but the GAO found that thousands of them will.
Yeah, well, I don't buy it. This rule to me is completely arbitrary, it's punitive, and you're trying to drive oil and gas producers off federal land. I think it's disgraceful. Finally, in my remaining time, Wyoming is home to the large population of greater sage grouse and its habitat. For over 15 years, with Republican governors, Democrat governors working together, Wyoming has been at the forefront of adopting new management approaches to protect the species. Instead of working with Wyoming, your Bureau plans to upend the state's successful efforts at balancing conservation with economic development. Why are you ignoring a state that has proven time and again that it can successfully protect the species?
Senator, respectfully, I have a different view on our work with your state. We've been meeting twice weekly with the state of Wyoming as we develop the sage grouse plans. The only way to make these plans work is to work together with our partners in the states, and we have been doing so, and Wyoming has been helping us lead the way with the sage grouse tax force at WGA. We are literally line editing the documents together, so I believe that they are going to have the durability that they need for success for the sage grouse.
Yeah, John Kennedy spoke at the University of Wyoming in 1963, and it was part of his tour of conservation in the West, and he said, we need to maintain a living balance between man's actions and nature's reactions. I have a picture of him giving that speech. Tom Udall's dad, who was Secretary of Interior, was with him that day in Wyoming, and it just seems that the BLM has gone a long way away from maintaining a living balance and basically trying to shut down the state of Wyoming. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Risch.
Mr. Manning, we're going to talk today about the Lava Ridge Project. You're familiar with it?
Yep.
Okay, that's good. I represent 1.8 million angry people, angry at you personally. And it isn't just the people of Idaho. We've got the legislature voted unanimously, House and Senate, objecting to this project, saying don't do it. We have the 7 Idaho counties that are affected unanimously adopting a resolution of disapproval, saying don't do it. Your own BLM Resource Advisory Council voted unanimously not to do this and said don't do this. The Shoshone-Bannock tribe submitted 2 comment letters in opposition to this project. The Friends of Minidoka Pilgrimage Planning Committee, and Japanese American Citizen League, who operate the sacred ground in there where they had a Japanese internment camp in World War II, said don't do this. We don't want this. We are angry about this, and I want to put this anger for you into perspective that you will understand. You remember previously your foray with Idaho was engagement in a conspiracy to spike trees in the national forest in Idaho. You recall that after you did that, the people that were charged, that you testified against in return for an immunity agreement, went to prison over it. Idahoans were angry. They were angry with those people. They were angry with you. Now they're seeing the same thing out of you because none of them want the debauchement of this 100,000 acres with these 660-foot towers on it. So, do you understand how angry we are about this?
Senator, I can hear the anger in your voice, and I know that change is difficult. This wind proposal is big, but what we did do with your constituents was listen very hard, and the proposal now...
No, you didn't.
The proposal now is halved, and yet it will still provide energy for up to 500,000 homes, almost a gigawatt of power.
Where are those homes located? I'll tell you, California. You know that. You think that makes us happy? Why don't you put this project in California? If they need the energy so bad, do it down there. We don't want this project in Idaho. So I have a question for you. You did this, by the way, you were talking about the shortage of your manpower. You put out this 832-page environmental impact statement that's nothing but drivel. In the statement, you know what I can't find? Anybody who supports this from Idaho. Can you name somebody or some entity in Idaho that supports this project?
Senator, I have seen a couple hundred comments in support from
Compared to how many opposed?
I don't know the vote count.
I'll help
Not a
you
vote.
out.
Yeah.
It's in the tens of thousands. Nobody wants this. Nobody wants this. Can you name anybody or any entity that wants this?
Senator, the anger that you're talking about is of concern to me on the ground. I'm not going to rise to the rhetoric and name names.
So what are we going to do about this? With all the opposition from Idaho and us getting no benefit out of this whatsoever, what are we going to do about this? That you just set that aside and proceed on? Who wants this? Who is it that's pursuing this? Is it you?
Senator, we responded to an application from a company to develop public lands. It's what we do every day.
So it is a company that came forward and you're responding to them and ignoring 1.8 million people plus the entire establishment of our government in the state of Idaho. You're ignoring that for the company that came in and said, oh, here, we want to debauch 100,000 acres and put 241 windmills up on this land. That's how you're going to proceed.
Senator, the final EIS does call for that. The original proposal called for 400 turbines, and we listened to your constituents. We listened.
You didn't hear any constituents say cut the 400 in half. Every constituent said, don't do this. So you didn't listen.
Senator, I hear the frustration and anger in your voice. We have issued the final environmental impact statement. It, of course, is not the final decision. That comes at the record of decision phase.
You know, I warned everyone when your confirmation was up that if you had someone who had such disrespect for the natural resources of America, for our country, and for my state, Idaho, this is what we were going to see. You ought to be ashamed. The administration ought to be ashamed. The Secretary of Interior ought to be ashamed. This is awful, awful, awful management of our public lands. It's not multiple use, it's abuse of our public lands. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ranking Member Bross.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Stoneman, the Bureau has yet to issue leases to the winning bidders of the December 2020 oil and gas leases. So it's now 2024, 2020 to 2024. When do you plan to issue the leases?
Senator, thank you for that question. We are still working our way through multiple court decisions. When we issue them, we want them to be durable and stick.
Because, you know, the law requires you issue the leases within 60 days, and it's now been over 3.5 years. So when do you plan, give me a date, when you plan to issue these leases? That by law should have been released.
Senator, I don't have a date for you at this time.
Okay. 3.5 years, long time. Again, we need a date. Next, in June of 2022, the Bureau settled a lawsuit related to oil and gas leases that it had issued between 2015 and 2020 in Wyoming. Mm-hmm. In that settlement, the Bureau agreed to update the environmental analysis of the leases. So the Bureau's Wyoming office, the state office in Wyoming of the Bureau of Land Management, says they finished updating exactly what you wanted last summer. Mm-hmm. Finished what you asked for last summer. So why is your Bureau not then released this updated analysis?
Senator, again, as I was mentioning, we are reconciling different court decisions and opinions throughout the West, and we want to make sure that we are consistent.
Well, it seems like a lot of foot dragging. The state officers can't issue the permits to drill on these leases, refuses to until the Bureau releases the updated analysis, which was now done which was done a year ago. So again, when will the Bureau release that analysis?
I'm sorry, which analysis?
The one that was done a year ago by the Bureau, Wyoming's Bureau of Land Management, based on the 2022 settlement.
Yeah, again, Senator, I don't have a date for you.
Yeah, well, we need a date. And you can see how every member of this side says this is a deliberate sabotage of American energy by an administration with this approach, which is a pipe dream about their view of when we can get to a carbon-free America. And as our hearing showed last week, Mr. Chairman, China's beaten us to this because they're putting all the energy into AI, and that puts us at a competitive world disadvantage. Final question, because we're trying to keep this under 3 minutes. So last weekend, I was at the Wyoming Stock Growers Summer Convention in Douglas. A number of folks expressed concern about the process by which your Bureau considers public comments. Does the Bureau require individuals who submit public comments to identify who they are and where they are from?
Senator, I believe that is the case. And if I could revisit your last question, I don't think it's sabotage to be at record production highs for oil and to issue 11,000 APDs.
It's a sabotage of public land use of the multiple use of the lands on public land. Well, so this is the question, getting the question at front right now. So someone from a country like China or Russia or a computer which doesn't want us to develop our energy or our mineral resources, are they allowed to submit public comments? Is that correct? Because that's what we're hearing. The answer is yes.
Yeah, I assume they are.
It is, yeah, so they, can the Bureau even determine then whether a comment has submitted by a human or by a machine? The answer is no, you can't. In light of all this, shouldn't the Bureau give the most weight to comments from the people and the communities who actually live, as my friend and colleague just said, of what's happening in Idaho and what's happening, who actually live and most affected by the proposals?
You might have suggested that your colleague has bots putting in comments. I don't think that's true. We read the comments very thoroughly. I think that we can tell when it's a bot and when it's a Russian and when it's an actual Idahoan, as the case is with what we got from the lava project. I don't understand what you're getting at, Senator.
We're getting at the fact that it seems that the comments coming in and are being counted as equal are those that have been in the land for 5 generations and those coming from communist China. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman. I guess I can see you're a little aggravated that we're after you for something that happened quite some time ago. But I want you to know that ecoterrorism is so bad that when someone commits that, they certainly ought to be disqualified from management of public resources. That's why we're angry about this. Now, Senator Hawley wasn't here, but I was here when you had your hearing, and you didn't tell us anything about that. You swore that you had never been investigated, and you knew better than that. In fact, you had an attorney. That attorney negotiated an immunity agreement so that you wouldn't go to prison. Isn't that true? Yeah, it's a yes or no, ma'am.
Senator, I never received a letter saying I was under investigation. That was the question. There
was never a question about whether you received a letter that you were under investigation. The question that was asked you was, have you ever been under investigation? And you knew you were under investigation. We were never able to cross-examine you on this. And as a matter of fact, after that, when it came to light, we started sending letters asking questions about it, and you wouldn't answer those letters. And you wound up getting confirmed on a party line vote, of course.
Senator, all of this came out also in my Senate confirmation at the state of Montana, where we went into great depth about...
Don't know anything about the state of Montana. I'm talking about sitting right here looking like this, where you were trying to become the head of the Bureau of Land Management. Let me say something else that really troubles me, is the lack of remorse of your involvement in this. You're saying, oh, I was handed a letter and I had to send it because I was scared. The investigation had things very different than that. There's a statement in there by the investigator that says Stone Manning, quote, was an active member of the original group that planned the spiking. There is a quote in here from a witness who overheard you. She said that she had overheard a conversation where Ms. Stone Manning, along with other co-conspirators, planned the tree spiking and discussed whether to use the ceramic or metal spikes in the trees. And we all know how important that is, whether you use metal or ceramic. Lastly, the ringleader of the whole thing, Mr. Blunt, said after your hearing, and you said, oh, well, I didn't know anything about this till they handed me the letter. He said, this is the ringleader of your conspiracy, said, quote, she knew about it far in advance, a couple of months before. So your lack of remorse here is despicable, to be honest with you.
Senator, I have to say for the record, none of what you just said is true.
Well, somebody sure thought it was.
And I actually...
Did you sign an immunity agreement?
I actually couldn't tell you the difference between a ceramic and a metal spike. I actually don't know the difference.
Well, the difference, as you know, is when they go through the mill, they're x-rayed, and if there's metal in it, they'll be able to kick it out. If you put a ceramic spike in, they'll never pick it up, and it'll kill mill workers. That's the difference between ceramic and metal, and they overheard you having this conversation with someone else. Look, I can't tell you how deeply disappointed I am, not only in what you've done. You wanted us to look at the last 3.5 years. The last 3.5 years has been a disgrace, as you've heard here today. Thank you, Mr. Chair.